I am grateful for this opportunity to share with you today, and I'm excited about where God is leading us and what God is doing. Here's the thing. I am convinced that either Jesus was God in the flesh or he was a liar. He cannot have been simply a great teacher. Now, a lot of people in the world think, well, Jesus was a great teacher, and obviously he, but either was God or he was a liar. And it's my firm conviction that he was in fact God in the flesh. And the truth is that if he was who he said he was, we're going to explore the book of John, which is all about God coming in the flesh. If he was who he said he was, then we must believe. And if he's not, then we must abandon it. It's either or. And this morning, I stand before you week after week, and I proclaim to you a God who is great beyond all that we can understand. A God who knows everything that there is to know. A God who made everything that exists. A God who is beyond our understanding. A God who is great. A God who is all-powerful. Who is amazing beyond our understanding. But I know life is so messy. We talked about a lot of different kinds of messes already, right? We described so many different messes, so many different kinds of messes, right? Family issues and financial issues, emotional issues and spiritual issues and health issues and man, there's just a lot of mess, right? Relationships are precious to us, but relationships are messy, aren't they? I mean, have you ever had a relationship of any real substance that wasn't messy? That didn't have some rocky moments? Yeah. We just don't, do we? The fact is, it's messy. But here's what I want you to remember today. God is in the mess. And today, we're going to talk about enough, but too much. So I want you to look with me. And we want to ask this question. Can this God who is so great, this God who is so holy, so amazing, this God you're always talking about, preacher, can he really, is it possible that he could really be interested in me and what's going on in my life? I say to you, he loves you enough, but too much. Let's explore it. In John chapter 1, we're going to begin in verse 1. It's a good place to start, right? Now, if I were to take the book of John and we were to walk verse by verse, phrase by phrase through this book, I'm pretty sure Jesus is coming back before we get to the end. And that'd be okay, but that could be another 20 years. I don't know, but I know this. It would take us a lot longer. I'm trying to zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture of the book of John, okay? Just kind of so you know. In the book of John, we look at the first few verses, and I want you to see with me, first of all, that God shows us here in this text that Jesus, this God in man, he made everything. He made it all. So let's look at verses 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Okay, did you catch that? Through him, all things were made, and nothing was made that wasn't made through him. Right? So, and I know, well, how do you know that's Jesus? Well, because down in verse 14, he said, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. That was Jesus. The whole book is about Jesus. In fact, if there is a theme verse for the book of John, it is chapter 1 and verse 14 says that the Word of God became flesh and dwelt among us. We saw his glory. That's the point of the whole letter, the whole book that John wrote here. But so we're talking about Jesus. And so it seems to say in these first three verses that everything that was created through Jesus. Jesus was the creative force behind creation. You remember back in Genesis chapter 1 where God reveals to us kind of the how and the rhythm of his creation, his unfolding of creation? It says over and over, there's these three words that you see in Genesis chapter 1. And God said. God said. What's the first thing God said? Let there be light. God said, and it was so. And God said, and it was so. So here, John chapter 1, he says, the Word, which is what God said, right? Was the power behind creation. That's Jesus. And so that's the idea he's presenting here. Jesus made everything. Everything that is, he made. He caused it to be. So, we take that and we look on and we see that not only did he make it all, but then he came here. Like here, like in the mess, right? He came here. Start with me in verse 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now, where is light helpful? Where it's dark? Okay. Why do you not walk around with a flashlight on in broad daylight? You don't need it. Before the world became dark, they didn't need the light. But when the world became dark, how desperately we needed the light. So the light, was the light, and the life was the light of men. The light shines, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now there's several different ways that's translated, but it seems to be said to say that the darkness has not stopped it. Some versions say the darkness comprehended it not. And comprehend is to grasp, to take hold of. So the darkness didn't take hold of it, didn't grasp it, didn't stop it, didn't overcome it. That's how they get the same two different ideas that come across in our English from the same Greek word. So, the light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. So look closely here when we get to verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came, right? He was in the world. He was in the world, the very world that he made. So, yes, he made everything that is. But then he came to us. He didn't make it throw it out there, hope it goes well. He made it. We made a mess of it. Then he came to us. He came to us. Do you see it? But why? I mean, that's a fair question, right? It's not just, okay, he made it. I can see that. Okay, he came to us. He came to earth. He's the light shining in the darkness. I get that. Okay, but why? Why? I mean, if this place is so messy and he's so holy, why would he bother? Let's read. Start back there in verse 10. Start in verse 10, and we're going to go down several verses. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. Did not know him. He came to be known. Look at verse 11. He came to his own. His own people did not receive him. Look at verse 12. Look at it powerfully. Oh, this is rich. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." Look at verse 16. For from his fullness, remember verse 14 said, full of grace and truth. Verse 16, for from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. Made him known. Verse 18. He has made him known. Why did Jesus come? He made it all. He put everything in place. He put it all together, and then we messed it up, and then he came to us. But why? Why did he come? Why would he bother? Why? He came to be known. He came to make himself known. He came to be known by us. He came so that you and I could know him. So we could see his glory. So that we too might receive that wondrous, from his fullness, grace upon grace. He came to be known. So what am I saying? What is the answer? Could this God who is so great and mighty, could he really care? Could he really be interested in me? Could he really care about the mess in my life? I will say that he loves you enough to step into your mess, but too much to leave you there. How can I say that? Well, because to know God changes everything. It changes everything. It means that he won't leave you in that mess, that he will deliver you. Somehow, some way, in his time, in his way, he will not leave you in the mess in which you find yourself. He loves you enough to step down into your mess, but too much to leave you there. That is why the Word became flesh and dwelled among us, so that we might see his glory, full of grace and truth. And from his fullness, we would all receive grace upon grace. He loves you enough to step into your mess, but too much to leave you there. So, if that's true, if this is really what John's gospel was all about, if this is really the essence of his message, and let's acknowledge that there are 4 gospel books, right? There's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. And John's last, and it's weird. When you read the other 3, you think, okay. And then you read Matthew's, and okay, Matthew's all about, he's connecting everything back to the Old Testament. And you got to, making sure the Jews understand that this is not just a guy, this was the king. You see Mark's gospel, and it's very short, and it's very quick, and it's very fast-paced, and he went, and he went, and he went, and he went, and he did, and he did, and he did, and he did this, and he did that, and immediately, and right now, and here we went. And it's all about how Jesus came to serve. He went from one thing to the next. You read Luke's gospel, and you see how Luke, the physician, was taking all these things that he'd heard, that he'd seen and had heard secondhand, and he laid out even a genealogy that traced Jesus all the way back to Adam. That he was really human. But John, he doesn't include the same accounts. There's some overlap, but not a lot. He wrote about different things that went on. And he, in fact, said, listen, there aren't enough books, there's not enough space in the world to contain all of the moments that Jesus impacted this world. He said, this is what he did because he was God in the flesh. Now, of all of those gospels, there's one that has a very different tone, and it's John. But if you read all of the gospels, you see something about John that you don't see about any of the others. You see that he himself identified himself. He refers to himself throughout the gospel as the disciple whom Jesus loved. That there were 3 disciples that were special, that Jesus poured extra into: Peter, James, and John. But John was the one who always seemed to be sitting next to him. The one that always seemed to be standing close to him. It's the one that Jesus said, take care, Mom. The man on this earth who was the closest in proximity and in intimacy with Jesus, God in the flesh, who would have been in the position better than anybody else on the planet to see his flaws. But there weren't any. To see the cracks, but there weren't any. To see the mistakes and the errors, but there weren't any. He's the one that testifies to us in this book. He's the one that God used to record these words to say to us, the Word became flesh and lived among us. And I saw him. I saw his glory. The glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And from that fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. He said, the Word became flesh. That's who I'm here to tell you about. It is Jesus, God in the flesh. God in the mess. God who loves you enough to step down into your mess, but too much to just leave you there. So what do we do with that? If that's true, if we can accept that that's true, what difference does it make? What do we do with that today, every day? I think there's 3 things I want you to see. 3 things I think we're supposed to latch onto through this series. I'm going to say it. I want to make it as plain and simple. I want you to be able to remember it. It's very simple. 3 things he wants us to do with this. First of all, see him. See him. As we look through the book of John, I encourage you, walk through the Gospels. And I believe that you should read the Gospels. You should read it all. Read God's Word, but read through the Gospels, but do it, do it down here instead of right up here. This time. Because if you're familiar somewhat with the Gospels and the accounts of all these different things that Jesus did, we're going to look at not the details of how he healed this guy versus how he healed this guy. We're going to look at the fact that he came into the mess of disease and brought healing. He came into the mess of immorality and brought grace. He came to the mess of hopelessness and brought hope. God in the mess is about this simple idea. You need to see him. Look at the messes he stepped into. See them all. Look around you and see the stories of people around you who have found themselves in great messes and have seen and witnessed God in that mess. Last weekend, we just shared about things that we've seen God do, right? We've seen God bring healing in different ways. We've seen God bring help in different ways. We've seen God bring hope in different ways. But you must look to see him. See him. First thing we're going to try to do with this series is see him. So look around at all the messes. Do you see him? Second thing we have to do, if we're going to do this, is believe him. Would you believe that God is not put off by your mess? I know that your mess is in your mind is probably worse than everybody else's, right? If you think that, go over and read John chapter 4. About a woman who'd had 5 husbands and was living with a guy that she wasn't married to now. Jesus was not put off by her mess. She was even a Samaritan woman. Believe him that he's not put off by your mess, that he is really interested in you, that he really is concerned for you. Believe him. But ultimately, I want you to know him. Listen, there are aspects of God's faithfulness that you cannot know without the mess. There are dimensions of His sustaining power and His supernatural provision that you cannot experience without the mess. There are depths of His faithfulness, of His love and His care for you that you just can't taste without the mess. And you will know Him more through the mess. You will know Him and the many different aspects of His faithfulness, the many different powerful displays of His faithfulness. You will know Him as God in the mess. If you never grieve, you can't know Him as comforter. If you never hurt, you can't know Him as healer. If you never need, you can't know Him as provider. You must know Him as God in the mess. In the next several weeks, we're going to go on this journey together. And those are the three things I want to challenge you to. Pray that you'll see Him. Long to believe Him. And lean in to know Him as God in the mess. You and I agree that life is messy. Today, would you just pause where you are and ask God to help you see Him, believe Him, and know Him? Would you pray with me? Father, there's no question that life is messy. There's no question that it's full of heartache and sorrow. Or we know it's there. It surrounds us every day. But God, we see that through this book, this gospel account from John, that you spent a great deal of energy through men to help us see that you came to our mess. Father, open our eyes to see you in the messes all around us. Strengthen our hearts to believe you despite the mess. And teach us, God, to know you more and more and more as God in the mess. And Lord, as your word told us, to all who believed him, you gave the privilege to become sons and daughters of God. I pray that if there's anybody here this morning who's never embraced the hope of becoming your child, that they would realize that you went to such incredible lengths so that we might know you as our Father, even in the midst of the mess. Teach us, Lord. Draw us to you. In Jesus' name.